Whether it's the questionable effects, the lead star's very controversial dalliances, or just audiences being burned one too many times by comic book films, there's one movie that is all anyone can talk about right now. And look, I get it. There was a lot of craziness that went on during this production, and had more people come and go to creative differences than any movie that we've covered on the show. So today on DC Revisited, we're getting into Andy Muschietti's The Flash.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Warning you guys and gals right now, if you have not seen The Flash, you're going to want to turn back now, because this is where things get super spoilery. Also, I do not have nearly as much footage as I usually have to play with, so apologies. Warner Brothers tried getting a Flash movie off the ground in the late 80s, with comic writer Jeff Loeb being brought in to write the screenplay. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of the property until 2004, when David S. Goyer signed on to write, direct, and produce a new Flash film. He was the top choice after impressing execs with his Batman Begins script. After working with Ryan Reynolds on Blade Trinity, Goyer approached the actor about taking on the role of Wally West. The plan was to have Wally as the main Flash, with Barry Allen appearing in a supporting part. But Goyer left the project in 2007 after creative differences with the studio. Night at the Museum's Sean Levy was brought on to direct the film, with a new script by Chris Brancato. But Sean Levy left the director's chair due to scheduling conflicts with Night at the Museum: Battle of the Smithsonian. In the midst of this, George Miller's Justice League Mortal was announced, with Adam Brody even cast as the Flash. So for the solo film, David Dobkin took over directing duties, with Craig Wright tackling the screenplay. After the 2007 writer's strike, along with even more shifting of writers and directors, the Green Lantern team of Greg Berlanti, Mark Guggenheim, and Michael Green were hired to write a new story for The Flash. You can imagine how that turned out once Green Lantern was released onto the world. Things finally got serious once Warner Brothers had their DC Comics universe up and running with Man of Steel. So, alongside Wonder Woman and Aquaman, The Flash was announced for a solo outing in July of 2013, with the plan to release it in 2016. But by October of 2014, they were no closer, so the release date was pushed back yet again, this time to March 2018. This is when we get into the Ezra Miller of it all. Okay, not that part yet. I mean his casting. Zack Snyder knew he was going to be setting up the Justice League in his film Batman v Superman, so he was responsible for casting each of the larger-than-life superheroes. And the role of Flash was an easy one for Snyder, because he knew who he'd cast the moment he saw the film Perks of Being a Wallflower. Ezra Miller had impressed audiences with their eclectic performance, and Snyder saw them as the perfect Barry. While a bit of an oddball choice, their performance as Barry is often a highlight, whether it's in the Justice League or this solo outing. And while they may have had their Flash, they still needed someone to guide the character to the big screen. Warner Brothers was so interested in getting director James Wan involved with their superhero universe that they offered him the choice of making either a solo film for The Flash or Aquaman. He chose Aquaman, so they once again had to find a new contender for the film. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller wrote a draft with the possibility of even directing it, but they instead chose to go work on Solo: A Star Wars Story. They may have regretted that one. Writer Seth Grahame-Smith, after having successfully made the jump to Hollywood with films like Dark Shadows and even the Lego Batman movie, boarded the project as a first-time director. But as has been said a lot so far, he then left due to creative differences. Rick Famuyiwa was then hired as a director, still using Grahame-Smith's script. Having worked with her already on Dope, his first choice for Iris West was Kiersey Clemons. Lucy Boynton and Rita Ora both were up for the part, but ultimately Clemens was cast. While Famuyiwa was involved in several casting decisions, he ultimately left the project due to those pesky creative differences again. Due to Miller's commitments to another Warner Bros. Franchise, Fantastic Beasts, The Flash was delayed yet again. With the film infinitely delayed, the studio decided to do a full rewrite of the script and hired Joby Harold. This is when Warner went a little bit crazy when courting potential directors. Matthew Vaughn, Robert Zemeckis, Sam Raimi, Mark Webb, Jordan Peele, and even Ben Affleck were all offered and turned down the gig for one reason or another. Despite this, Warner announced that summer at Comic-Con that the film was still happening and would now be titled Flashpoint. The next update on the film wouldn't happen until January of 2018, when Spider-Man Homecoming writers John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein came aboard as writers and directors. Production was expected to begin in February of 2019, but filming was yet again delayed due to Miller's obligations to the Fantastic Beasts franchise. This time, the third sequel, The Secrets of Dumbledore. This is where things get very strange. Well, stranger, because Ezra Miller teamed up with famed comics writer Grant Morrison on a new version of the script. Their script was more akin to Back to the Future and didn't feature the multiverse elements. Miller had been very disappointed by the lighthearted approach that Daly and Goldstein took, so wanted to try their hand at it. The studio rejected the new script, but still asked Miller to remain on as the Flash. Given that Ezra hadn't liked the drafts from Daly and Goldstein, and Warner still wanted Miller as their lead, Daly and Goldstein saw the writing on the wall and left the project. Having enjoyed her work on Birds of Prey, the studio hired Christina Hodson to do a pass on Joby Harold's script. These would be the final credited screenwriters. Although it's said upwards of 48 people had their hand at the script. Finally, director Andy Muschietti and his producing partner and sister Barbara signed on to the film. So we finally have a director. But then, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, production was delayed yet again. But this allowed more time for the film to cook, as it was then announced in June of that year, Michael Keaton would be returning to his iconic role of Bruce Wayne/Batman. It's an absolute joy to see Keaton get back into the Batsuit again, and he's just a joy to watch anytime he's on screen. But he's not the only Batman in the film, as Ben Affleck was also set to reprise his role of, you guessed it, Batman. Affleck has said that this was his favorite time playing the character, finally feeling like he understood him and knew exactly how to play the scenes. He also said that it was a nice finish for his Batman, so whether we see him again may be up to more multiverse shenanigans. Sasha Calle made history by being the first Latina to portray Supergirl. She beat out other actresses such as Rachel Ziegler and Bruna Marquezine for the part. It's an inspired choice, and she's a real standout in the movie. Despite this being a very different look to anything she's had in the comics, it immediately feels both modern and cool. Plus, you can't tell me she doesn't look like she's Henry Cavill's cousin. Okay, we'll get into the story at this point because otherwise some of these characters being brought up may not make sense. The story starts off with Barry really struggling as he tries to balance his life and accidentally discovering that he can go back in time. So he uses his newfound power to go back and stop his mother Nora's death. But when he returns to the present, things have changed, and not all for the better. Batman is now much older, there are no metahumans, and Superman does not exist. So Barry has to team with Bruce and his alternate self in order to fix the timeline. It gets crazy and we get a ton of really interesting cameos. While Billy Crudup originally had the role of Henry Allen in Justice League, he was forced to drop out of the solo outing due to scheduling conflicts with his TV venture, The Morning Show. Thankfully, Office Space's Ron Livingston fills out the role perfectly. Then his mother Nora is portrayed by Maribel Verdú. Both Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman and Henry Cavill's Superman appear, though Cavill is mostly CGI. Jason Momoa's Aquaman also showed up in a post-credit scene where Barry's telling him all about his latest adventure. Originally, Ray Fisher's Cyborg was going to feature much more prominently, but after his very public beef with then Warner Brothers president Walter Hamada, he refused to work under any production that was under Hamada's rule. As is, his character is diminished to mere references. And in a nice way of calling back to the beginning of Snyder's DC venture, Michael Shannon's General Zod returns. While he gets significantly less screen time than he did in Man of Steel, he steps seamlessly back into Zod's shoes. Anjay Trao also reprises her role as Feora Ul, but it's a blink and you'll miss it cameo, as is Tamora Morrison's Thomas Curry, who appears when Barry's trying to find Arthur in the alternate timeline. Jeremy Irons also shows up as Alfred again. We also get a nice shot of Christopher Reeve's Superman, as well as Helen Slater's Supergirl. But the real coup de grace is Nick Cage as Superman fighting a massive spider-like creature, just as he was described to have done in Kevin Smith's Superman Lives script. It's a crazy moment, and one, like many here, that I wish I could show you right now, as I never thought we would be able to see it on the big screen. In probably the craziest reveal of the movie, we get to see the new Batman in the form of George Clooney. I was fortunate enough to go out to the Warner Brothers lot and view the film with the Muschiettis almost 2 months before release, but this scene wasn't included. It was originally shot with Michael Keaton. Instead, George Clooney shocked the world by returning to the role that he once lamented. But this wasn't the original ending attached to the film. The original had Keaton's Bruce Wayne and Sasha's Supergirl exiting the vehicle, as evidenced by several set photos. But then when Black Adam set up Henry Cavill's Superman to return, they shot a new ending with Keaton, Sasha, Cavill, and Gal Gadot. Then, once Peter Safran and James Gunn took over the DC Cinematic Universe, the ending was reshot yet again once it was decided that Cavill's Superman would not be returning long term. Why Clooney was chosen is still yet to be revealed, but with Andy Muschietti being announced as the director of Batman the Brave and the Bold, I'm sure we'll find out soon. And this is where we need to address the Ezra Miller stuff. Because while filming took place in England from April to October of 2021, its star would have a very tumultuous 2022. First, they were arrested in Hawaii at a karaoke bar after having a fight with a group of customers. They then accused the officers of committing a hate crime due to misgendering the non-binary actor. A separate Hawaiian couple was then granted a restraining order against Miller after they barged into the couple's bedroom and threatened them. But that wasn't even the beginning of their troubles, with a video surfacing in April of 2020 that allegedly showed Ezra strangling a woman and throwing her to the ground. Then there's Miller's Vermont farm, where several unseemly things were alleged to have happened. I feel like we've covered just about as much as necessary to get the picture that Miller really messed up, and many expected them to be canceled for it. But Warner gave Miller two options. They could get professional help, do limited press for the film, and the movie would release as planned. Or they could refuse help, be excluded from all press, and the role would eventually be recast. There had even been rumors that the film would be relegated to the HBO Max streaming service to lighten the financial burden. Instead, Warner decided that they would do a more grassroots campaign and rely on word of mouth. Having several early screenings before the release, the word was extremely positive, with it seeming like the film was destined for greatness, even receiving endorsements from people like Stephen King and Tom Cruise.
You're strapped to your parachutes.
Where's yours?
The Flash opened on June 16, 2023, and brought in a measly $55 million on its opening weekend. Seeing as how this film released just 1 week ago, we obviously don't have a worldwide box office quite yet, but one thing is for certain, it isn't going to be pretty. Filmed on a budget of over $200 million, when you factor in marketing, then it's hard to see The Flash doing more than just recouping its total cost. While Warner clearly hoped that by keeping Ezra away from the press, audiences would be more likely to let his dalliances slide, this proved to not be the case, as the film brought in even less than the abysmal projections. While this number is sure to change, The Flash is currently sitting at a 66% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But even despite what the internet is saying, the critical consensus is that The Flash is funny, fittingly fast-paced, and overall ranks as one of the best DC movies in recent years. These are very trying times for Warner, as they failed to have any real success with their DC films the last few years. The window for the company to get things right is quickly shrinking, with David Zaslav coming aboard and making several controversial choices, such as shelving the finished Batgirl movie, as well as getting rid of HBO staples like Westworld. It's a wonder whether we'll see a new president by the time the DCU actually gets back on track. All we know for certain is that Peter Safran and James Gunn are at the helm, with Superman Legacy being the first film in the new DCU. Getting away from the multiversal controversy, we're diving into a whole different controversy as we finally get all of our DC superheroes under one roof. But that's a story for next time. Join us, same movie time, same movie channel.